It's my privilege to introduce Mr. Jayant Sinha. He is the Member of Parliament in the Lok Sabha from the Hazaribagh constituency. He's also one of the most thoughtful and progressive champions on the climate issue in the country. Mr. Sinha, the audience is here and the presentation is coming up shortly.
Thank you very much, Shyam. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Shyam, for having me. I'm joining you from Surojpura Panchayat in Padma Prakhand, Padma block in Hazaribagh. So I apologize for the quality of the video and the connectivity, but I'm very glad I was able to fit this into my schedule and join you all. Hopefully, what we will discuss in the next half hour or so will be of some interest to you all, and perhaps somewhat more interesting than your mobile phones. I know everybody's addicted to their phones these days, and so it's very hard to gain people's attention. But I think that the materials that we will cover this evening and the topics that we are discussing are vitally important, not just for us, but for succeeding generations. And I think it's very important for India to seize the climate opportunity. It is vitally important. It's among the most important things that we can be doing, both in our day-to-day lives, as well as in thinking about the future. So if we can go to the next page. So I just want to discuss with you basically three main points. One is that all of the work that we're doing today, and I have been working now on this very steadily for the last 3 years. And of course, I introduced the Net Zero Private Members Bill in Parliament as well, that decarbonization and development should not be thought of separately. Decarbonization, in fact, is India's development, and therefore India needs to follow the Green Frontier Development Model. The other big headline, friends, is that net zero is net positive. So if we move towards net zero and if we decarbonize completely, we are actually going to be better off than under the baseline case. So this is a very big finding, very big headline, and that is that net zero is net positive. And for us to get to net zero, we need a global climate alliance. If we have a global climate alliance that will help India achieve net zero, it will also enable the world to prevent cataclysmic climate change, which I'm sure you all have been discussing, and you've been talking about various ways of doing it. But the incredible opportunity that India has right now is through the G20 presidency, is to forge this global climate alliance, and I'm going to talk about that as well. Next page. I think we just lost the presentation. Is that on the screen?
Still on.
It's still on. So I don't need to tell all of you, but unfortunately, I actually can't see the presentation. Yeah, there we go. So I don't need to tell all of you that we are at a situation where we are seeing things that we didn't think we would see for another 10 or 20 years, which is that, carbon parts per million have hit 421. I well remember some 3 or 4 years ago where we were discussing 400 and hoping that we would not hit 400, because at 400, we were definitely going to get 1.5 degrees centigrade global warming, but we've in fact hit 421 parts per million. Next page. Now, because we've hit 421 parts per million, global warming is accelerating. So you know well that we hit 1.5 degrees centigrade, or we are likely to hit 1.5 degrees centigrade sometime in the next couple of decades. In the next couple of decades, we are going to hit certainly about 1.5 degrees of global warming. And this has happened over the last 200, 250 years that we've reached 1.5 degrees centigrade. However, because we've hit carbon parts per million of 421, global warming is accelerating. And when it accelerates, then in the next 60 or 70 years thereafter, let's say we hit by 2030, 2035, 1.5 degrees centigrade, we are going to go to another 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade in the next 60 or 70 years. So warming is accelerating. It's not just that we are getting 2.5, 3 degrees centigrade warming. It's happening much faster than people had expected. And that's really very concerning for us. Next page. And obviously, as a result of it, we are seeing these extreme weather events. I need to hardly remind you that last year, Europe was dealing with massive flooding problems, and the Rhine was overflowing, and everybody was talking about all this flooding that was happening in Germany. And now this year we're dealing with this extreme 500-year, once in 500-year drought in Europe, and the same Rhine that was flooding is now completely dried up. So we are getting these extreme weather events where we are, going from flooding to drought. In Jharkhand this year, we've had a massive drought situation. I've been out in the fields. जो हम लोग जून में बिहन को लेकर जो हम लोग रोपाई करते थे, वो हम लोग अगस्त में कर रहे हैं. तो इसलिए आज के समय कोई किसान नहीं है जिसकी कोई अपेक्षा है. Nobody is thinking कि हमारी धान की खेती हो पाएगी इस बार. अब हम लोगों को सिर्फ फसल खेत की नहीं होगी, फसल धान की सिर्फ जो हम लोग कर रहे हैं वो चारे के लिए कर रहे हैं और हम लोग जानवर के लिए कर रहे हैं. कोई हम लोगों को धान की खेती इस बार नहीं हो पाएगी. We are having a massive drought in Jharkhand this year. Next page. And of course, heat waves are becoming more and more common. We had an unprecedented situation in April and May of this year, where April and May were 122-year record highs in terms of average temperature. None of this, would have happened if it not had been for carbon to be rising so quickly in the atmosphere. Next page. And as a result of that, because we are seeing these extreme weather events, we're seeing heat really getting to be much higher than expected. Many states, including my own home state of Jharkhand, is experiencing blackout conditions because we don't have enough peak capacity to be able to meet the power needs that we have when we hit these extreme weather events. Next page. Now, the other thing that we need to recognize, and you are in Mumbai, and I noticed that you're in the Taj, we are going to experience significant rises in sea level. Again, you know this well, so I don't need to belabor this point. But the numbers for India are somewhere between 0.5 to 0.8 meters of sea level rise. This for coastal cities is going to be extremely destructive. Next page. Because again, even for Mumbai, because of this sea level rise by 2050, we're going to see, perhaps 0.5 meters rise in sea levels. We also have more frequent cyclones. We are going to see storm surges of 2 or 3 meters that are possible. So whether it's Kochi, Calcutta, or Mumbai, we are likely to see very significant cases of destructive flooding. And if I own real estate in these coastal cities, if you own real estate in Mumbai, you have to be seriously concerned about what's going to happen to that real estate, given the kind of flooding that we are likely to experience. So these are all very damaging consequences of the increase in carbon emissions and, of course, the rise in global warming. Next page. Similarly, in agriculture, 20% of our rural districts, Hazaribagh being one of them, is at very high risk of climate change impacts. And as a result of that, we are likely to see significant adverse impact in terms of harvests. We saw that with wheat in April and May. We are seeing that in paddy in Jharkhand in August, September. So these are very real effects that impact people on a day-to-day basis. We can't ignore these. We can't pretend that they're going to happen in the future. They're happening now. Next page. And this is what people are expecting in terms of agricultural yields. Wheat in particular, people are saying that it could be hit as much as 25%. This is work that's been done by the Indian Council for Agricultural Research. Next page. Now, with these trends underway, we have to ask ourselves the question, what is going to happen to India's carbon emissions? Now, I've done a lot of modeling work and worked with some of the climate scientists and the most expert technical groups on how India's carbon emissions are growing. You know very well that most countries have put in place net zero pledges, but India's carbon emissions are actually continuing to grow on an absolute basis. Today, we are emitting something like 2.5 billion tons of pure carbon. I'm not talking about greenhouse gases. I'm only talking about carbon. And as time goes on, these carbon emissions are going to increase from 2.5 billion tons. By 2050, India will be at 5.8 billion tons of carbon emissions. So even as the world is going to net zero, our carbon emissions right now are going up. And even though we made the net zero declaration in Glasgow, right now the baseline case for us is one in which we are not going to be able to hit net zero very easily. Next page. And so we must figure out a way of bending the curve. The baseline scenario, as I said, the scenario that we are on right now, with all of the commitments we've already made, the 500 gigawatts of renewables, all of that included, friends, including all of that, the business as usual scenario still takes us to 5.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. If we want to get on the net zero curve, which is the green line, we've got to bend the curve in the next 10 years. Let me repeat that. The baseline that we are on right now, the trajectory that we are on right now, is going to take us to 5.8 billion tons by 2050. If we are going to be on the net zero by 2070 trajectory, we've got to bend the curve immediately. Otherwise, we will never be able to attain net zero by 2070. Underneath that, remember what is happening with coal. Today, we have 220 gigawatts, 210 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity. And right now, all our plans are that coal-fired capacity, rather than being brought down, is actually going to increase over the next decade. We are going to go to 260, 270. That's the long-range plan that the Central Electricity Authority has put in place. We will be going to 260, 270 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity right now. That's our baseline, and that's why carbon emissions are increasing. We have about 1 billion tons of carbon emissions right now from coal-fired power plants, and they are likely to go up to 1.3, 1.5 billion by the end of 2030 because of the fact that we're continuing to add coal. So we are not on a trajectory where we can even get to net zero by 2070 right now. That is something we need to recognize, and we need to do some very serious action to bring the net zero curve into play. Now, you might well ask, how have you done this modeling? Well, I've worked with the best modeling groups on the planet, people at Cambridge Econometrics, people at MIT, people at Tufts, people in the Energy Innovations Group, World Resources Institute. I've been working with the best modeling groups in the world to understand what India's carbon trajectory is, where are we headed, and how do we change that? So this work that you're seeing is based on all of that. Next page. So what I have proposed is a green frontier development model, which is, rather than following the standard farm to factory development model, which is getting us, more GDP for sure, but at the same time is actually resulting in a lot more carbon emissions and so on. Rather than follow that trajectory, we need to follow net zero pathways that will not only reduce emissions, they will also result in job creation and robust economic growth. So we have to find these net zero pathways that are actually better for us. Next page. And this means that we need to follow a green frontier development model. We've got to convert our electricity system entirely to renewables. We've got to move to electric vehicles. We've got to massively scale up green hydrogen, biofuels, and we've got to put in place global and national carbon trading. These are the kinds of things we need to do to be able to get to the green frontier and to really change our development model completely. Next page. And if we are to do that, and this is the headline, folks, as I said, because our current trajectory is not sustainable. As you saw, we are going to 6 billion tons of carbon. If indeed we are able to follow the green frontier development model, if we follow a net zero pathway, we are actually going to do better in terms of GDP. Our GDP is going to be higher if we follow a net zero pathway than if we were to continue on the baseline case. Next page. And not only is net zero net positive in terms of GDP growth, net zero is net positive also in terms of job creation. We will actually create more green jobs if we follow the net zero pathway, the green frontier development model. Next page. And we will also bring down air pollution dramatically. Now, when I show this chart to my friends in public health, they say this has to come ahead of GDP, it has to come ahead of job creation. Because today, India is the most polluted country in the world. We are losing 1 to 2 million lives a year due to air pollution. And if we shut down fossil fuels, if we move to green, we are going to save 1 to 2 million lives a year that we are losing today because of air pollution from fossil fuels. So net zero is net positive also in terms of lives saved. Next page. And very importantly, if we bring down our fossil fuel consumption, if we go to net zero, we are going to stop importing vast amounts of fossil fuels. Today, we are importing already $230 billion worth of fossil fuels, including crude oil, coal, and natural gas. If we move to a net zero scenario, we are not going to eliminate fossil fuels completely, but we are going to bring them down significantly. And that will be very, very good for our macro economy because we won't be importing hundreds of billions of dollars of fossil fuels from other countries and having to pay for that. So if you look at it on a macro perspective, this is going to be very, very positive if indeed we are able to reduce our usage of fossil fuels. So net zero is net positive from a macro perspective as well, from an import perspective as well. Next page. Now, what's the catch? If green is good, if the green frontier development model is better than the traditional development model, why is it so hard to do it? And the answer is that we have to invest massively in green technologies. You heard Anish Shah speaking, you heard Dalmia Cement telling you about green cement, you heard about electric vehicles. But if we have to completely change our cement factories, completely change our steel factories, completely change our vehicles so that they're all EVs, they will require trillions of dollars of incremental investment. And that's actually the reason why GDP is going to do better, job creation is going to do better, because relative to the baseline, we will invest in the case of net zero by 2070, something in the range of $2 to $3 trillion of incremental capital. $2 to $3 trillion of incremental capital. That will obviously be high productivity investment, and that will obviously drive growth in India. And that is what is really required to be able to get to net zero by 2070. It's the investments that are driving growth. Next page. And so how do we attract these $2 or $3 trillion? So what I'm proposing is, and what hopefully India will pursue through the G20 presidency, is a climate alliance. And in the climate alliance, we need the global north and the global south to come together. The climate alliance has to basically say the global south will decarbonize, decarbonization will be development, but in return for that, the global north has to provide us the investments, the global north has to provide us the global capital flows. Otherwise, we will not be able to generate the trillions of dollars that are required. India is a capital-starved country. We are already getting about $50 to $100 billion a year of foreign capital, which is driving our growth. We need that much, double that amount, $50 to $100 billion a year, additional green investment to be able to invest in our green technologies. And that's why we need a climate alliance where there is a quid pro quo. We sign up for net zero on a legally binding basis. And in return for that, we get the investments that will drive our economy and drive decarbonization. Next page. Now, I'm not going to get into a detail, but we are working very carefully to figure out exactly how we can create a global climate alliance. We are in discussions with the G7. We are in discussions with think tanks and research institutes around the world, but we are looking at it in great detail to be able to figure out how a global climate alliance can be created. Next page. And to be able to create a global climate alliance, we have to balance a variety of things. We have to balance equity with efficiency. We have to balance price-driven approaches with policy-driven approaches, command and control approaches. So the solution space is one that's going to balance all of these different approaches, laissez-faire approaches, command and control approaches. All of these will have to be balanced out to come up with something that is, both highly equitable as well as very efficient, so that we can actually make this happen and drive investments into green technologies. Next page. To do that, we are analyzing various different models as well, right? We have the Paris NDCs that are there. We have the EU Fit for 55 model that's there for a climate alliance. IMF has proposed a carbon pricing model where they're looking at carbon pricing as being the best way to solve this problem. But we have to take all of these different climate agreements, put them all together. And when we put them all together, we have to find something that can fit in the solution space and can be a global climate alliance. Lots of work has been done in this regard, and we will soon be releasing our approach for doing this. There's a lot of excitement about how we intend to build on what's happened in Paris and what's happened in EU with the Fit for 55. Next page. Ultimately, anything we do is going to require a set of green financing institutions, a network of green financing institutions that will pursue a market-driven approach to be able to accelerate investments into green technologies. If we create a whole variety of funds, put capital into them, that's how we are going to be able to drive and enable net zero to happen. Next page. So this is why we need to seize the climate moment, folks. This is why we need to seize the climate moment. We have already built a very successful international solar alliance. We have the G20 presidency that we are going to be assuming in December of 2020. So we need to create a global climate alliance. We need to create the leadership. If we do that, we save India and we save the world. That's the benefit of a global climate alliance that can drive investments and make this happen. I'll stop here, folks. Happy to take any questions you might have about all of this. But as I said, India must seize the climate opportunity. We have the G20 presidency this year. We can propose a global climate alliance that's going to enable India to get onto a decarbonization net zero pathway and attract the capital flows that will make this happen. I'll stop here. Thank you very, very much.
Mr. Sinha, thank you very much for that. We're just trying to figure out the technology if we're going to be able to get audience questions. If anyone has questions, can you hear me? No, I don't think he can hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Oh, okay, all right.
Fine.
So
if anyone has any questions, perhaps they can give them to you, Shyam.
Yeah, fair enough.
You can ask me that question.
Any questions for Mr. Sinha? So maybe I could ask a question because
Sure.
The ask for climate financing is a very compelling and rational ask from a climate justice point of view. But does the political economy exist in Europe and the US and other high emission countries for the public to allow their governments to allow these kind of significant flows? The recent US bill, for example, is an impressive bill. It's a large bill, but it's entirely in the US, and it in fact further reinforces bits about needing to buy in the US, etc.
No, that's absolutely right, Shyam. But let's not wait for people's charity. Let's not wait for people's political leadership here. Let's make it profitable. Let's make it commercially viable, and let's make it the world's best investment opportunity. Because then the capital will flow. Mark Carney is running around with $140 trillion. Let's get some of that $2 or $3 trillion into India. And that money will flow. There's lots of capital that's invested right now in low return opportunities. If I can give you 8 or 10% dollar returns, people will invest. So we have to obviously provide them viable investment opportunities. And if we do so, as we've done in solar, and as you heard in terms of electric vehicles, people are making money, with electric vehicles, because the total cost of ownership of electric vehicles is now less than that of ICE vehicles. Yeah. So all our auto rickshaws are going to electric, all our, ride hailing cabs are going to electric. Why? Because it's cheaper. They're making more money. So, money talks, money works. Let's use that. And, you'll say, well, there's lots of stuff that's not commercially viable right now. You're absolutely right. But over the next 5 or 10 years, we have enough commercially viable opportunities. That's the low hanging fruit. Let's go for that. And then technology will catch up. We will make other things more commercially attractive through green hydrogen, etc., etc. And so then we'll invest in those. So right now, is solar making us money? Yes. So let's put it into solar. Are electric vehicles making us money? Yes. Let's put it into electric vehicles. Is it possible to make money in biofuels? Yes. Let's put money into biofuels. So there is a trajectory of investment as well, where we can absorb lots of capital right now, and then when the time comes, there'll be other technologies that will be ready also, and then we'll invest in those as well. So I think let's not worry about political economy. Let's worry about the economy, not the political economy, right? Let's make sure it's profitable, it's investable, and that we are a very attractive investment destination. People will whip out their checkbooks to make money, wouldn't you? Don't you want to make 20% returns? Suppose I gave that to you, wouldn't you invest your pension in it?
You bet, you bet. A question. I think the easiest way is if you tell it to me, or can she speak it directly? Okay, great. If you could just give your name and then ask the question.
Hi, I'm Mithika. I actually like that you mentioned carbon trading here as well. We got a little glimpse of it under Saudi's presidency in G20, and the fact that you're proposing it for this year is exciting. I just had a quick question. What do you see as a future of carbon trading from India and a globe standpoint? And how do you plan on avoiding greenwashing or double accounting or just general sort of lack of accountability structure in this manner to actually create impact?
Yeah, so those are big questions. Obviously, we have to start first and foremost with setting the right standards and having the audit and monitoring capability to make sure that there isn't greenwashing. As you know very well, there's a lot of debate right now about is decarbonization happening? Are people reporting the right numbers? But I have a lot of confidence that the audit community and the standard setting communities will get it right. We've done it for many, many things. So we'll do it for green as well. And of course, SASB and others are working on it. So we will be able to, I'm sure, come up with the green standards. And those companies that actually do it truthfully, honestly, and in an accurate and transparent way, they'll get the benefits of carbon trading. They'll be able to trade their carbon credits or their carbon allowances. And because, again, they'll make money on it, there will be an incentive for them to do it correctly. And that's why I said a global carbon trading system, because carbon prices in India will tend to be low, but carbon prices in Europe are already very high. As you know, they're at $80 per ton and even higher, and going higher because of the Ukraine situation. So if I'm avoiding a ton of carbon emissions in India, why can't I gain $80 a ton as opposed to just getting $20 a ton in India, for example? So we've got to find a way of doing it in in an honest, transparent, and highly compliant way in India. And by the way, RBI and SEBI are starting to work on this. There are working groups that are looking at all of this. And then once we do that and we can say, yes, we have avoided a ton of carbon emissions, then that ton should become tradable globally, because that's where we're going to get the best prices. So, of course, this is a globally valid sort of traded commodity, and a ton saved in India is equivalent to the ton saved in Europe. And so we should clear the global market, not just the Indian market.
Any other questions? Any other questions? One hand up there, Tejaswini.
Hello, sir. This is Neha here. I have a question on incentives and subsidies beyond solar or beyond renewable and mobility. So maybe can you talk, and I know it's a very vast subject, so can you maybe talk about financial institutions? Because like we've seen over the course of today and in my past experience as well, I was with IFC, that project financing and transition financing is going to be very critical, and is actually one of the biggest gaps. So how are you looking at financial institutions, private sector banks, public sector banks really playing a key role, either through priority sector lending norms or other norms?
So generally, I'm a believer in market forces and really ensuring that we make investments that are in line with how markets tend to operate, right? With incentives and subsidies and so on, it becomes very distortionary and it becomes very policy driven. And the challenge then becomes, how do you administer it over time? How does it dynamically evolve, et cetera, et cetera? When we leave it to market forces in a well-regulated manner, then all of these dynamic effects, all of the innovation, all of the investments starts to happen naturally. So the question really is, how do we ensure that we have well-regulated, well-functioning markets for these kinds of green technologies? That's really the question. The good news here is, as I was saying earlier, that there are a host of green markets that have developed right now that are completely viable and investable purely on a commercial basis, right? So we don't need to get ahead of ourselves. Again, as I said, let's look at solar. Today, 24/7 solar itself is cheaper than 24/7 coal, right? We know that from the price discovery that's happened. Now, are we investing sufficiently quickly in 24/7 solar? No, we know it's commercially effective, right? we can do it at 3.5 rupees per unit, whereas coal is for 4.5 rupees per unit. So 24/7 solar with pumped hydro and battery storage is already cheap. Now, how much solar do we need right now? We need, a huge amount of solar, 40-50 gigawatts a year. Are we putting in 40-50 gigawatts a year? Are we investing sufficiently in solar right now? The answer is no. So why worry about other areas? Let's just invest a huge amount in solar, right? So everything I'm saying about solar, I can also say about electric vehicles. Today, we have 2 million auto rickshaws in India. Okay. Out of the 2 million auto rickshaws right now, maybe 100 to 200,000, maybe 300,000 are electric. Well, let's turn over the entire stock. We can invest billions of dollars just turning over auto rickshaws, three-wheelers, which we know. By the way, do you know that the cost of an electric rickshaw is less than the cost of an ICE rickshaw? The capex is lower and the opex is 1/3, 1/5 that of an ICE and auto rickshaw, right? So let's just do auto rickshaws. Similarly, for ride-hailing cabs, today you could switch the entire ride-hailing fleet over from ICE to EV, because on a TCO basis for a fleet business model, it's actually cheaper to run EV. Now that's billions of dollars invested in EV. So what I'm saying is, for the next 10 years, we can just invest in commercially viable technologies in huge green industries and not worry about incentives and subsidies. In the meanwhile, technology will take its inexorable course, and technologies that today are inexpensive are going to become much, much more affordable. That's exactly what's happened with solar. That's exactly what's happened with EV. The beauty of technology, and I speak as an engineer, the beauty of technology is that when you set the right incentives and you say, this is the direction we have to go, technology usually finds a way. That is human innovation and ingenuity. But the market incentives have to be there. People have to make money, so that if I'm investing in R&D, my R&D gives me a 10x, 20x, 50x return. If that's going to happen, the R&D is going to happen, right? So we need to make sure that market incentives are working. If market incentives are working, the investments will come in, and that's, plenty that we need to do, and then we can worry about incentives and subsidies. You see what I'm saying? So as investors, as business people, this is the most amazing investment opportunity of our lifetimes. But we don't have to chase something that's not commercially viable right now. Let's just get stuff done that's commercially viable. Even that we are not getting done, whether it's solar or EVs. You see what I'm saying?
Sir, thank you very, very much. You don't have a proper shot of the audience, but I can tell you that I spotted several people taking pictures of your slides from on their phones, and lots of diligent note taking. Thank you for a very thoughtful presentation and taking time out when you're in your constituency. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Hey, this is the thank you moment. I was trying to distill what I picked up during the course of the day, and I have 4 insights and 1 question mark. One is that India needs to spend more on R&D. That's really clear. If we're at 1/3 of industrialized levels, Make in India is good. Make in India gives us growth today. Design in India will give us success for the next 100 years. And so that's one takeout from the national perspective. From a corporate perspective, you'll hear about the green premium, the fact that newer technologies cost a lot. Virtually every single example that we heard from on corporate India today, they are realizing a green bonus. Efficiencies, going renewables, etc., is improving their bottom lines now and is improving their, shareholder value in 6 months, 1 year kind of time frames. On investors, I don't know, at the moment when he said it, I think the line was a little bad. The message to investors is what I think Ashish was quoting and John spoke about, 1,000 unicorns in climate tech. Who's saying this? Larry Fink. Who's agreeing with him? John Doerr. So investors in India, hear that message. Don't miss that bus. Show up with your checkbooks. On startups, there's something, your energy, your innovation is remarkable, but there's something unique about climate startups compared to startups that you see sometimes in other sectors. They make business sense. They have P&Ls, they deliver results. It's not, give me $1 billion and I'll continue making losses after 8 years and then suddenly something changes. And that's really stunning. People often tell you there was a climate bubble some time ago. The way you guys are doing it, and you're incredible ambassadors for Startup India. So those are the four. The fifth one, which I don't have an answer for, is how on earth do we get Indian research and academia to partner closer with Indian corporates? It's instead of going to Cornell, and I have no issues with Cornell in case anyone's an alumni, but how do we get, instead of going to Cornell, to Kharagpur? And it almost appears like there needs to be a sea change in the way Indian academics and institutions are run. Thank you all for being a patient and wonderful audience. Thank you for staying with us during the day. I want to especially say thank you to the EDF team and our partners, Brunswick and Union, and the EDF folks. Will you just please stand up? We pulled off this event. We're a tiny but mighty team. So please stand up, and can everyone just give them all a round of applause. Our commitment and our ask to you is today is not the end. This isn't a one-off event. We will continue to do this over a period of time. That's right. They were the ones who were supposed to stand up, and that's right. And they never. So our ask to you is today should not be the end. Keep the conversations going. Keep, asking startups questions. Keep pestering investors. Keep hounding corporates. Our commitment is that we will not allow this to be a one-off event. We will continue to build momentum on this. So thank you all and have a wonderful evening. And with thank you. Hey, Nikhil, I can finally say hi.